Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James, and once again I am being attacked by all kinds of technical gremlins. First, my soundboard quit working, and then GarageBand quit working, and then my mixer stopped working, and, well, I had to turn the computer on and off 3 times trying to get all the different things working together. So, hopefully, now I've got things under control, or they've got me under control, one of the two. The question was brought up by David Subeth whether or not Adolf Hitler ever had the atomic bomb. So I started doing some research into that, and the results might surprise you. First off, don't forget the Edinburgh Out of This World UFO Conference and Festival is back on schedule. Thursday, April 8th, the festival will kick off with open mic night at the Edinburgh Municipal Auditorium, which is located just behind Edinburgh City Hall. Those interested in sharing their accounts of personal encounters or footage are highly encouraged to contact 956-383-6246, or you can get them on email at arts@cityofedinburgh.com. It is free and open to the entire family. Friday the 9th, there will be the Ufo Festival at the Edinburgh City Hall courtyard. There will be music, food, special UFO-themed events, alien costumes, and much more. Meet all the guest speakers, meet some authors, the celebrities from the UFO conference. I hope to be there. In fact, I am going to be there unless Godzilla or space aliens attack. The event is free, open to the family. It begins at 5 p.m. Saturday, April 10th, the festival will be hosting the UFO speakers who are coming to Edinburgh to share their investigative work on the UFO phenomena. The conference will be at the Edinburgh Ebony Hills Golf Course, 300 West Palm Drive in Edinburgh. Starts at 9 o'clock in the morning and ends up at 5 p.m. Don't go to the Renaissance. You'll be in the wrong location. The golf course is about 12 blocks south from City Hall. You can get conference tickets at the Dustin Michael Sukula Memorial Library or online at EdinburghUFO2021eventbrite.com. If you bought tickets for last year's show and you still have them, you didn't cancel the things, they will be honored this year as well. Tickets will start at $25 and they'll go up at the door to $35, so you want to get your tickets ahead of time. There may not be any vendors at the conference. They're still trying to decide due to the Black Plague of 2020. If there are no vendors at the conference, you won't be able to get all those cool books that you normally go home with. So go to the festival, you can find them there. Or if you see me at the conference and you want one of my books and I can't sell it to you at the conference, maybe we can go out to the parking lot and do it there. David Subeth, like I said, he had asked me about the Nazi atomic bomb. Most folks today assume that the Allies would win World War II. If you watch a lot of movies, it looks as if the German army didn't have what it took to win. A lot of people in the United States and England were actually sympathetic towards the Nazi cause. A lot of others thought we should simply ignore the problems on the other side of the world. Some were willing to wait and see what might happen as Germany and Japan invaded country after country. Germany had some advanced weapons at the beginning of the war. Though best remembered as a late war weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262 actually was developed prior to World War II, in April 1939. With the success of the Heinkel He-178, the world's first true jet, which flew in August 1939, the German leadership pressured for new technology that could be made into military use. Project P worked on developing the jet fighter for the aviation department with at least a 530-mile-per-hour flight and an hour of endurance. Design of the craft was under Dr. Waldemar Voigt, who oversaw the Messerschmitt Chief of Development, or correction, they oversaw him, Robert Lucier. 1939-1940, Messerschmitt completed the initial design of the aircraft, and they began building prototypes to test in the air. The biggest reason Germany didn't have hundreds of jet fighters was Hitler wanted a jet bomber instead. He had a lot of ideas that helped the Allies far more than the Germans. Things like, let's invade Stalingrad instead of going to the Russian oil fields. Boy, would history have been different if Hitler had listened to his generals. Hitler believed the world could be divided into three groups of people. Did I just stumble through that one? Hitler believed that the world could be divided into three groups of people: the founders of culture, the bearers of culture, and the destroyers of culture. The founders of culture, in Hitler's view, were biologically distinct Aryan race who had been tall, blonde, and originated in Northern Europe. He believed that in prehistory the Aryan race had been responsible for all significant developments in human culture, including agriculture, architecture, music, literature, and art. He believed that most modern Germans were the descendants of these Aryans and had genetically inherited the Aryan biological superiority to other races. They were the bearers of culture. I am tall. I have blonde hair and blue eyes. I don't feel superior to anyone, well, except the drunk guy laying in the gutter. The destroyers of culture, in Hitler's view, were the Jews. This idea didn't come to him until he had gained power as the Chancellor of Germany. He believed that wherever the Jews went, they damaged and ultimately destroyed culture. He blamed them for the loss of the First World War. In 1937, Walther Wüst was appointed the new president of the UNRB. Wüst was an expert on India. Dot, not feather. Somehow the idea got started that the folks living in India were descendants of the Aryans. They were supposed to be a racially pure group, but many had intermixed with Untermensch, or people of inferior standings. This led to the people of India getting darker skin. Scientists studied different classes of Indians, trying to find the pure Aryans. Others studied ancient Indian texts, looking for secrets of long-lost weapons. Archira Kanad was born in 600 BC near Dwarka in Gujarat, India. His real name was Kashyap. Kashyap was on a pilgrimage to Prayag when he saw thousands of pilgrims in the streets carrying flowers and rice grains, which they were going to offer at the temple. Kashyap was fascinated by the small particles, and he began picking up the grains of rice. A crowd gathered around to see this strange man collecting grains from the street. Kashyap was asked why he collected the grains that even a beggar wouldn't touch. He told them that individual grains in themselves may seem worthless, but a collection of some 100 grains make up a person's meal. The collection of many meals would feed an entire family, and ultimately the entire world. Thus, even a single grain of rice was as important as all the valuable riches in the world. From that time on, people began calling him Kanad. Kan in Sanskrit means the smallest particle. Kanad pursued his fascination with the unseen world and with conceptualizing the idea of the smallest particle. He began writing down his ideas and teaching them to others. Thus, people began calling him Aichara, teacher. Hence the name Aichara Kanad, the teacher of small particles. Kanad was walking along with some bread in his hand, and he began breaking it into small pieces, when he realized he was unable to divide the food into any further parts. It was too small. From this moment, Kanad conceptualized the idea of a particle that could not be divided any further. He called that indivisible matter Parmanu, or Anu, which means atom. Aichara Kanad proposed that this indivisible matter could not be sensed through human organs or seen by the naked eye, and that an inherent urge made one Parmanu combine with another. When two Parmanu belonged to one class of substance combined, a binary molecule was the result. This molecule had properties similar to the two parent Parmanu. Kanad suggested that it was this different combination of Parmanu which produced different types of substances. He also put forth the idea that atoms could be combined in various ways to produce chemical changes with the presence of other factors such as heat. He said the blackening of pots and the ripening of fruit as examples of this phenomenon. Aichara Kanad founded the Vishishka school of philosophy, where he taught his ideas about the atom and the nature of the universe. He wrote a book on his research, Vaishishik Darshan, and became known as the father of atomic theory. In the West, atomism emerged in the 5th century BC with the ancient Greeks, Leucippus and Democritus. Whether the Indian culture had influenced the Greeks or the Greek culture had influenced the Indians is unknown, and both countries claim it was theirs first. Kanad is reported to have said, every object of creation is made up of atoms, which in turn connect with each other to form molecules. His theory of the atom was abstract and enmeshed in philosophy, as they were based on logic and not on personal experience or experimentation. In the words of A.L. Basham, the veteran Australian ideologist, they were brilliant imaginative explanations of the physical structure of the world, and in a large measure agreed with discoveries of modern physics. A pioneer of nuclear physics and the first to split the atom, Ernest Rutherford was awarded the 1908 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his theory of atomic structure. He was dubbed the father of the nuclear age. A discovery by nuclear physicists in a laboratory in Berlin, Germany in 1938 made the first atomic bomb possible after Otto Hahn, Lise Meitner, and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission. When an atom of radioactive material splits into lighter atoms, there is a sudden, powerful release of energy. The discovery of nuclear fission opened up the possibility of nuclear technologies, including weapons, and that was in Berlin. Among the most interesting and perplexing aspects of the Nazi regime was its connection to India and Hinduism. Hitler took the most prominent symbol of ancient India, the swastika, and made it his own. The link between Nazi Germany and ancient India goes deeper than the swastika. The Nazis venerated the notion of a pure, noble Aryan race who are believed to have invaded India thousands of years ago and established a society based on a rigid social structure or caste. The most fervent Nazi adherent to Indian Hindu traditions was Heinrich Himmler, one of the most brutal members of the senior command. He decided to send teams of men to India to investigate a possible connection between there and Germany. Britain had been trading in India since about 1600, but it didn't start seizing any land until 1757. The Battle of Placey pitted 3,000 soldiers of the British East India Company against 50,000-man army of Nawab of Bengal and his French East India Company allies. At one time, the East India Company had a 260,000-man army, twice the size of the British Army at the time. The battle between the two forces began June 23, 1757. It had rained, and the Nawab's gunpowder had all gotten soaking wet. The British had covered their gunpowder, so they were still able to use their rifles and their cannons. At the end of the battle, the British seized the equivalent of $5 million from the Bengali treasury, and they used it to finance further expansion. The East India Company was primarily interested in trading cotton, silk, tea, and opium. But after the battle, they began to focus more on the idea of opium and less on the other things. By 1770, heavy company taxation and other policies had left millions of Bengalis impoverished. While British soldiers and traders made their fortunes, the Indians were starving. Between 1770 and 1773, about 10 million people, that's 1/3 of the population, died of famine in Bengal. At this time, Indians were also barred from holding high office in their own country. The British considered them inherently corrupt and untrustworthy. When World War II broke out, India contributed to the British war effort. In addition to troops, India donated substantial amounts of cash. By the end of the war, India had an army of 2.5 million men. About 87,000 Indian soldiers died fighting for Britain. The Indian independence movement was very strong. British rule was widely resented. POWs captured in Libya during the Battle of Tobruk were questioned by German officers about their loyalties to British rule or if they would prefer independence for India. Any prisoners found wishing for independence were then sent to Berlin. As more recruits were found, an Indian division was formed consisting of 4,500 men. They were being trained and groomed to return to India and fight the British. Because there were far more Indian soldiers fighting in the East, 40,000 Indian POWs were recruited by the Japanese to fight against the Allies in exchange for an eventual independence of India. A lot of folks don't know this, but in the beginning of World War II, Jews living in Jerusalem would root for Hitler. Every time the Nazis won a battle with the British, the people in Jerusalem would cheer. They had no idea what was actually going on. They only wanted to see the British ousted from their country, and anyone that looked like they might do it was considered to be the hero of the day. It wasn't until escapees from concentration camps began to make their way to Jerusalem that the Jews found out who the real monsters were. The ancient symbol of good luck, the swastika, was the traditional symbol of Thor, the Norse god of thunder, and was favored by German neo-pagan movement in the early 20th century. They called it the Hakenkreuz, or bent cross. In similar fashion, the Hakenkreuz was adopted by the Thule Society, whose members, like the neo-pagans, had a strong anti-Christian streak. The word swastika is derived from the Sanskrit swasti. The word swastika has been used in India subcontinent since 500 BC. Heinrich Schliemann discovered more than 1,800 ancient samples of the swastika's symbol and its variants while digging in Heiserlich Mound near the Aegean Sea when he was looking for the ancient city of Troy. Schliemann linked his findings to the Sanskrit swastika. This word swasti occurred frequently in the Vedas as well as in classic literature, meaning health, luck, success, and prosperity. It was commonly used as a greeting. The final ka is the common suffix that could have multiple meanings. The sign implies something fortunate, lucky, or auspicious, and it denotes well-being. In 1920, a member of the Thule Society, Friedrich Krohn, suggested to Adolf Hitler that the Nazi Party should adopt the Hakenkreuz as its symbol. Hitler placed it on a white circle against a red background to compete with the hammer and sickle of the Communist Party. The German Ahnenerbe found copies of Indian writings. As they were translated into German, stories were discovered telling about a great battle taking place thousands of years ago using weapons of unbelievable destructive power. Mohenjo-Daro, which means Mound of the Dead, is situated in the province of Sindh, Pakistan. It was one of the largest settlements of ancient Indus Valley. The city was built around 2600 BC, and it continued to exist until about 1800 BC. The ruins of the city were discovered in 1922 by an officer of the Archaeological Survey of India. The crew had been led to the mound by a Buddhist monk who believed that there was a stupa buried under the ground. In the 1930s, massive excavations were conducted into the ruined city. When the excavations of Mohenjo-Daro reached the street level, they began finding skeletons scattered about the city. Many of them were laying in a position that looked as if people had been running for their lives. These skeletons were thousands of years old. All the bones of the skeletons were found located in one spot, which meant that animals hadn't come into the city to make a quick meal. Now, this is nearly unheard of. Any time there are massive deaths, there are animals that take advantage of the situation. Why didn't animals enter Mohenjo-Daro? The scientists discovered these skeletons are among the most radioactive ever found. They're on par with those from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. An ancient, heavily populated city in Pakistan seems to have been instantly destroyed 2,000 years before Christ by an incredible explosion that could have only been caused by an atomic bomb. At one site, Soviet scholars found a skeleton which had a radioactive level 50 times greater than normal. Other cities have been found in northern India that show indications of explosions of great magnitude. One such city, found between the Ganges and the Mount Rajmahal, seemed to have been subjected to an intense heat. Huge masses of walls and foundations of the ancient city are fused together, literally vitrified. Since there are no indications of volcanic eruption at Mohenjo-Daro or these other cities, the intense heat to melt clay vessels can only be explained by an atomic blast or some other unknown weapon. David Davenport spent 12 years studying ancient Hindu scripts and evidence at the site where Mohenjo-Daro once stood. What was found at the site corresponds exactly with what happened in Nagasaki. Davenport published his findings in Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC. There was an epicenter, which was about 50 yards wide, where everything was crystallized, fused, or melted. 60 yards from the center, the bricks were melted on one side, which indicated a blast. This mysterious event from 4,000 years ago was recorded in an old Hindu manuscript called the Mahabhatara. White-hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes. Water boiled. Horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. It was a terrible sight to see. Never before have we seen such a ghastly weapon. Based on his study of the many ancient manuscripts, Davenport believes that the end of Mohenjo-Daro was tied to a state of war between the Aryans and the Dravidians. Aryans controlled regions where space aliens were mining materials and exploiting other natural resources. Because it was a Dravidian city, the aliens had agreed to destroy Mohenjo-Daro on behalf of the Aryans. The aliens needed the friendship of the Aryan kings so they could continue their prospecting and research. A text tells us that 30,000 inhabitants of the city were given 7 days to get out. Some people didn't heed the warning, and that's what all the human skeletons found laying in the streets were. There's also a story saying that the city of Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed during a battle between India and Atlantis. It is said that Atlantis unleashed some powerful, terrible weapon against the city and destroyed the entire place in a matter of seconds. With all these stories of incredible weapons able to destroy entire cities, the Nazis got busy trying to create, or more likely recreate, these weapons. In one manuscript, researchers found a device that could fly without any wings. These were known as vimanas. By spinning a huge electric field in one direction while rotating Mercury in the other direction, you could cancel out gravity. One translation said that these craft could not only travel through space, but time as well. The Vimana sound almost like a TARDIS. All these Indian books, scrolls, and manuscripts were shipped back to Germany to be studied and hopefully created. December 1938, German chemist Otto Hahn and his assistant Fritz Sassmann sent a manuscript to the German science journal Natural Science, reporting that they had detected and identified the element barium after bombarding uranium with neutrons. Their article was published January 6, 1939. Otto Hahn had communicated his findings with Les Meitner, who had fled Germany in July and had moved to the Netherlands. Meitner and her nephew Otto Robert Fisch confirmed Hahn's conclusions, calling it nuclear fission. April 22, 1939, after hearing about the use of uranium fission in a nuclear reactor, George Jost notified Wilhelm Dames at the Reich Ministry of Education of a potential military application for nuclear energy. After this informal work began at the George August University in Göttingen by Jost, Hanel, and their colleague Reinhard Mannkopf, the group of physicists became known informally as the First Uranium Club. The group's work was discontinued August 39 when all 3 men were called up for military training. Paul Harteck was the director of Physical Chemistry Department at the University of Hamburg, and he was an advisor to the Army Ordnance Office. April 24th, 1939, he contacted the Reich Ministry of War to alert them to the possible military applications of nuclear chain reactions. This initiative led to the Second Uranium Club being created. An industrial firm called Augustschloss had a substantial amount of waste uranium left over from extracting radium. After reading the June 39 paper by Siegfried Pflug on the technical use of nuclear energy from uranium, Nicholas Ryle, the head of the scientific headquarters of the company, recognized a business opportunity when he saw one. In July, he went to the Army Ordnance Office to discuss the production of uranium. The Ordnance Office liked what they heard, and Ryle was committed to see what he could build. The Reich Research Council started a formal German nuclear weapons project under military cooperation. The day World War II began, Heisenberg said that in principle, atomic bombs could be made. It would take years, maybe 5, but it could be done. He said, "I didn't report it to the Fuhrer until 2 weeks later, and very casually because I didn't want the Fuhrer to get so interested that he would order great efforts immediately to make the atomic bomb." Speer felt it was better that the whole thing should be dropped, and the Fuhrer also reacted that way. He said they presented the matter in this way for their personal safety, as the probability of success was nearly 0. If thousands of people were working on nothing, that could have extremely disagreeable consequences for us. Hitler didn't like failure, especially big failure. So they turned the slogan around to make use of warfare for physics and not make physics for warfare. Erhard Milch asked how long America would take to develop the bomb, and he was told that it would take years longer than it would in Germany. All those scientists would communicate back and forth for years before the outbreak of the war. They knew who was interested in what and how good they were at making discoveries. Since Einstein was Jewish, he was not taken into consideration. When it was decided the nuclear weapon project would not make a decisive contribution to ending the war in the near term, control of the project was returned to its umbrella organization, the Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft, in January 1942. The physicists were allowed to keep plinking away, and they formed the next Reich department that would control nuclear weapons. And on that great idea, I'm going to take a brief pause and play some commercials because my tongue and my brain have stopped communicating. I'll be right back after this. If your house is infested by ghosts, maybe it's time to contact somebody that can help you. Call the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and they'll come by and see if they can't do something about your uninvited guests. You can contact the LPRS at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. I had no idea what I was missing until I had my eyes checked at the Optica del Norte 107 Calle del Norte. Now I can see all kinds of things I'd been missing my entire life. You should get your eyes checked too. Why would anybody go through life drinking bad coffee? It's like a disgrace. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, the best coffee on the planet. You can find them at 4501 McPherson, Or, if you don't live in Laredo, you can order at organicmancoffeetrike.shop, the absolute best coffee on the planet. Isn't it about time you did something for your skin besides mistreat it? Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019 and take care of your skin with a free skincare class. It wasn't until I started playing these commercials back to back that I noticed I had the same music on several of them, so maybe I'll re-record them someday, or maybe not. The nuclear weapon project maintained its war importance designation, and funding continued to pile in from the military. But it was split into areas of uranium, heavy water production, uranium isotope separation, and the uranium machine, or nuclear reactor. It was in effect broken up between institutes where the different directors dominated the research and set their own research agendas. Instead of having everybody all in one spot working on the same project, they had hundreds of people in different locations, each working on their own ideas. There are a number of sources that say on October 12, 1944, 9 months before New Mexico's U.S. nuclear device was set off, Nazi Germany detonated a nuclear bomb on the island of Rügen in the Baltic Sea, the first in a series of 3 tests. It is reported that Luigi Romersa, an Italian correspondent during World War II, was personally dispatched by the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini to the island of Rügen to witness the weapon test. Romersa was the last known witness to have come forward to what he and some historians have said was the detonation of a Nazi nuclear device. In an article by John Hooper in The Guardian, dated September 30th, 2005, Romersa related his experience. He is quoted as saying, "They took me to a concrete bunker with an aperture of exceptionally thick glass. At a certain moment, the news came through that detonation was imminent. There was a slight tremor in the bunker, a sudden blinding flash, and then a thick cloud of smoke. It took the shape of a column and then that of a big flower. That big flower sounds a lot like a mushroom cloud that's seen in an atomic explosion. The officials there told me we had to remain in the bunker for several hours because of the effects of the bomb. When we eventually left, they made us put on a sort of a heavy coat and trousers, which seemed to me to be made of asbestos, and we went to the scene of the explosion, which was about a half a kilometer away. The effects were tragic. The trees around had been turned to carbon. No leaves, nothing alive. There were some animals, sheep in the area, and they too had been burnt to cinders. The other 2 devices were set off March 4th, 1945 and March 12th, 1945. Both were detonated in the central part of Germany in the mountain and forest state of Thuringia, near the town of Ohrdruf. The test is said to have killed over 700 POWs, who were interred at Ohrdruf concentration camp, located practically under Ground Zero. Those killed were burned. The survivors suffered from severe nosebleeds and untreatable burns. Claire Werner, a resident who happened to be standing on a nearby hill, witnessed the explosion in what she termed as a military training area not far from the town of Ohrdruf. When asked about what she had observed, she had stated, "It was about 9:30 when I suddenly saw something. It was as bright as hundreds of bolts of lightning, red on the inside and yellow on the outside. so bright you could have read a newspaper. It all happened so quickly, and then we couldn't see anything at all. We noticed there was a powerful wind. Then everyone began having a nosebleed, headaches, and pressure in their ears. The next day, a man named Heinz Wachschmidt, an employee of the local excavating company, was ordered by the SS to assist in building wooden platforms to cremate the remains of the corpses of the prisoners. According to Wachschmidt, the bodies were covered with horrific burn wounds. He also reported, like Werner, that local residents complained of headaches and were spitting up blood. Captain Alois Lythen was a U.S. intelligence officer assigned to Orduf to investigate the camp for the military. What is odd is Captain Latham was ordered to do this investigation long before he had arrived in Germany. Why did all the U.S. Army generals visit this one small camp and none of the others? Could it be because there was something else of great interest in Orduf area besides the Führer's bunker and the salt mines where the Nazi treasures were stored? The Buchenwald camp had been liberated the day before the visit to Orduf camp. At Buchenwald there were shrunken heads, human skin lampshades, ashtrays made from human bones. At Orduf there was nothing to see except for a shed with a few dead bodies in it. So why did Captain Alois Lythen take the 4-star generals to Orduf instead of Buchenwald? What was Captain Lythen referring to when he wrote these words in a letter to his family? After looking the place over for nearly a whole day, I came back and I made an oral report to my commanding general. I was ordered to do so by my boss, the colonel, in my section. Then, after I had told him all about the place, he got in touch with the high command and told them about it. For the next several days, many generals and scientists visited the area. General Eisenhower immediately ordered a propaganda campaign against Nazi atrocities. This could have been to distract the media away from the small camp, or it could have been to let the world know how bad the Nazis had been. In his book entitled The SS Brotherhood of the Bell, author James P. Farrell wrote about the German test of a small, critical mass, high-yield atomic bomb at or near the Orduf Troop Parade Grounds on March 4, 1945. The troop parade ground was at the German army base which sat right next to the Orduf labor camp. That late in the war, what Germany needed was a game changer, and an atomic bomb, like the Nagasaki bomb did for the U.S., would have done the trick. The question is, what would that use as a game changer have been? Again and again, when researching the German nuke, you read there were scientists working on a program that was being stalled of forward momentum. However, the device used in Rügen Island blast was said to have bypassed the heavy water bomb and went straight to the use of uranium, and done so under the direct hand of the SS. During the war, the Germans were obsessed with the destruction of either Hoover Dam or New York City. Any fully operable, deliverable atomic device would have been aimed towards the destruction of the city. The problem was that the bomb wasn't done yet. Blowing something up under ideal conditions in a controlled situation is one thing. Doing so while flying it a long way and trusting the guys moving it to not break anything, as well as the possibility of being shot at, is a whole other situation. Plus, a way of getting the bomb to its target was still needed. Junkers would make 3 versions of the Ju-390. The 390A was a reconnaissance plane. The B was for transportation, and the C was to be a bomber. The new long-range American bomber would have been called the Ju-390C, which was also known as the New York Bomber. It boasted a longer fuselage for a more massive payload, an increased wingspan, could carry 6 engines. Additionally, it possessed advanced onboard systems. 2 Ju-390s were built. One sat unused at the Brandenburg Air Base in Berlin. The second plane was held by General Himmler, who was running the secret base called Giant, where the Nazi Bell was being built. The Ju-390 could fly 6,000 miles without refueling. Well, it is 7,000 miles from Germany to New York. Mexico has some vast stretches of land where nobody lives. A plane could manage to fly a secret field from Mexico to New York and back. Germany had secret bases along the Gulf Coast in Venezuela. Buenos Aires, Argentina is 5,300 miles. An aircraft could fly the distance, deliver its bomb, and still maybe manage to get away. There were several airfields around New York, but most were for training. You weren't going to find any aces stationed there. Even if they were, the German pilots might have been led to believe they could get away. Germany also had some long-range subs. The Type 9 U-boat could cruise 12,000 miles without refueling. Germany had been developing V-2 rockets that could be launched from a U-boat. Unlike V-2s and the vast majority of other operational German retaliatory-type rocketry weapons, which used liquid fuel, which would make transporting and use extremely difficult, the Rheintackler R-1 was solid-fueled, meaning it would be fully operational at a moment's notice, and they could withstand long transportation times over rough seas and tumultuous rivers without special handling. There was also a U-boat that Hitler had classified as being a vengeance weapon. Any bomb can only be as big as its ability to be delivered. As planes became bigger and more powerful, the bombs they carried could be bigger and more powerful. Any bomber flying to its target was vulnerable to attack by defending aircraft. Building a huge bomb in the front section of U-boat, you're only limited by being able to deploy it in such a way you could then escape. Now, U-boat crews may have had a few screws loose, but they weren't suicidal. The sub would have had to sneak into shoreline close to New York, drop off the bomb, and then sneak back out, and then detonate. Too many moving parts to be sure of success. The mission had all probabilities of being detected prior to reaching or accomplishing its goal, so for the Reich to have incorporated some sort of non-conventional top-secret weapon they had on the shelf, such as an operational heavy-water bomb or the German atomic bomb, is a bit questionable. This doesn't mean they weren't looking into it, though. Heavy water provided a path to turn common uranium into plutonium, one of the easily split or fissionable materials that fuel nuclear weapons. It's been unearthed from one top-secret or high-intelligence document that was captured, long-suppressed enemy records, from research analysis of obscure German patents and strange reports. This unearthed document was a revelation, had been very much against the interests and desires of many nations. The U.S. define ourselves in terms of being the first nuclear power on the planet and the sole nuclear power to ever make a nuclear strike. Germany isn't served by adding a horrific first nuclear attack to its endless list of crimes against humanity during World War II. Nobody wants to credit the Nazis with getting the bomb before the U.S. or the U.K. Japan cries nuclear rape at the drop of a hat, and they have no desire to be shown to have had a successful atomic bomb test before the end of the war. They also hate it when you bring up Unit 731 and the Fugo balloon bombs they launched against us, and the way they treated their prisoners in China, and the POWs they worked and starved to death. Glass houses, you know. Along with the 3 successful tests conducted by the Nazis, they are also credited with using a nuclear bomb against Russian troops in 1943. During the back-and-forth movements of both German and Russian lines at the Battle of Kursk, the Germans sent a nuclear bomb into the Russian lines. To deliver the bomb, the Germans used a device, but a very effective and devious delivery device: a truck. First, the bomb was put together using slave labor, so none of the safety protocols were needed. Most of the nearly 10,000 pounds that our first nuclear bombs weighed came from the lead shielding that was used to protect the folks who built the thing. Next, the weapon handlers on the ships and on the ground needed to work around highly radioactive devices, so the lead was there to keep them alive as well. The B-29 flight crew had to be protected from lethal radiation doses. Lots of American lives that needed to be protected by using a huge quantity of weight. The men under General Himmler were able to build a 30-kiloton A-bomb, which weighed roughly 1/5 of a ton. Weighed roughly 1/5, or about a ton. Much less than an A-bomb, and with twice the desired yield. With no thought for disposable slaves, the bomb was put together with no shielding. It could have then been transported in a special lead case by rail, because the soldiers guarding it would be needed later on to fight. The bomb arrived near the front lines, and all the lead could then be removed, once again by those disposable slaves. The bomb was loaded into the back of a big truck, and then it was left to sit and wait for the right moment. As the Russian troops began to advance once more, the German troops were told to pull back. A few Jewish prisoners were left behind with a truck that to them looked like a quick way to escape. Wanting to get away in case the Nazis returned, the prisoners jumped in the truck, held up a white flag, and drove towards the advancing Russians. At a predetermined time, the bomb went off. Those closest to the massively radioactive surface burst were vaporized. The next group were incinerated or killed by the blast. A shock wave was caused by the force of air being compressed and traveling faster than the sound of the explosion. It would have been like being hit by an invisible train. Debris was sent in all directions, causing even more death and destruction. At first, the Russian officers, who were not close enough to the blast to know what had happened, thought the Germans were using some kind of a chemical weapon like gas. It took days before anyone knew what had happened, so people just kept walking through the now radioactive area. All the equipment in the area was picked up to be used. This led to more troops becoming sick with radiation poisoning. Stalin didn't want anybody to know anything about his troop casualties. He immediately put a lid on the entire situation. No one was to talk about what happened under penalty of death. The bomb was supposed to have been a 30-kiloton yield. A kiloton is the equivalent to 1,000 tons of TNT. The bomb did its job, but it only gave off a 5-kiloton yield. Still pretty impressive. The Germans now had a means of winning the war if only they had the material to build more bombs. They ramped up the production of fissionable material. The one big thing Hitler hadn't wanted had become a reality. When Japan attacked the U.S. and we entered the war, Germany suddenly found themselves facing a new, bigger and badder adversary. Things began to go wrong all over Europe. They were no longer winning the war. All the manpower and natural resources needed to build a wonder weapon was no longer easily accessible. I can just imagine how Hitler must have had a long, nasty rant directed towards Emperor Hirohito. When the regime you work for looks unstoppable, you do whatever they ask. Suddenly, it began to look as if those nasty things scientists had been doing might just come back and bite them in a delicate place. All those Jewish prisoners used to build all their dream devices became possible war crimes. It was becoming a good idea to plan for an escape. Those in the SS who knew they would hang began shipping gold and jewelry to South America. Those with limited means began squirreling away things that the Allies might find valuable in order to bargain for their lives. As the American troops began to march across Europe, the scientists who had been helping the Nazis win their world domination began throwing themselves at the feet of the new conquerors. There's something unpleasant about most intelligence operatives. They are the less savory of any military operation. Spies and saboteurs are a much-needed part of winning a war, but it tends to lead to some nasty consequences. As the German scientists began surrendering to Americans, the OSS began looking for ways to benefit from what they knew. Operation Paperclip was a secret program of the Joint Intelligence Objective Agency, largely carried out by special agents of the Army CIC, in which more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, people like Werner von Braun and his V-2 rocket team, were taken from Germany to the United States for U.S. government employment, primarily between 1945 and 1959. Many were former members and some were former leaders of the Nazi Party. In Operation Overcast, the original intention was to interview the scientists, but what was learned changed the operation's purpose. May 22, 1945, the folks in charge contacted Pentagon headquarters by telegram urging the evacuation of German scientists and their families as most important for the Pacific War. They were still fighting Japan. Most of the scientists and engineers working at the Baltic Coast German Army Research Center, Peenemünde, were developing the V-2 rockets. As Russia began to change from our ally to our opponents, the Nazis suddenly became our allies. There's a huge difference between Germans and Nazis. Most Germans were not war criminals, but just about every single Nazi had things in their closet they didn't want anybody to know about. Yes, there were those who joined the party so they could survive, but the vast majority were criminals. Had I been there and my family was in the balance, would I have joined the Nazi Party? I can only hope not. We all do things that we never planned to do. When the fertilizer hits the ventilation system, a lot of us don't really know how we're going to react. When I was a bit younger, I was told the United States had only managed to extract enough fissionable material to build 2 nuclear weapons. They used one as a test at White Sands. Then they dropped one on Hiroshima and one on Nagasaki. I did the math and I found something wasn't adding up. Something to think about. When the first A-bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, many of the people living in the outskirts to the west packed their things and ran. They ran west to a second big city called Nagasaki. When they arrived, they told people about how a giant explosion had wiped out their hometown. Most people thought they were delusional. 3 days later, the folks living in Nagasaki found out their friends and relatives were not crazy. There were some people living in Japan who had not one but two atomic bombs dropped on them. If the U.S. only had enough fissionable material for two bombs, where did we get the third bomb from? Germany surrendered May 7, 1945. Hiroshima was destroyed August 6th and Nagasaki on the 9th. Could the material, or maybe even the bomb itself, have come from all the German scientists who were brought to the U.S. during Operation Paperclip? Looking at the numbers, and the conclusion I come up with is the third bomb must have come from Germany. The historians want us to believe the Nazis never developed any nuclear weapons. These are the same folks who say that Hitler committed suicide. I did a show about Hitler and why I doubt he killed himself back in December 11th, 2018, if you want to check it out. There's another story that just doesn't hold any water. So did Germany during World War II develop their own atomic weapons? I think they did. A lot of other people think they did. Just because the historians and the mainstream media say that it never happened, it doesn't make it true. A lot of times they're telling us what they want us to think. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, let your friends know. Don't forget about the Edinburgh UFO Conference in April 8th, 9th, and 10th. Be there if you can. It should be an exciting event since it's the first one we've had in over a year. If you have a story that you think might sound good in a book and you want to let me have it, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. My next book will hopefully be out by the end of this year. It's simply paranormal stories from all over the place. If you have a story, something your father, your mother, one of your relatives or friends told you, as long as you believe it's true, I'll put it in the book. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?